How's it going, Patrick and Duane? Like I feel like we've been trying to plan this thing for like a year now.
Hey, Joe. Yeah, I feel like old friends. I asked you,
right?
Have we talked before? And you're still like, I don't think so. We keep trying.
It feels like it, though. It feels like it.
Right. Yeah, we've been pen pals over email for a year.
Whatever happened to pen pals? They used to do that in schools. You used to write a letter, snail mail. Now it's a dying art.
I actually got letters in the Gulf War when I was on the front lines in Iraq. I got letters from kids, and it was actually quite fun for the soldiers to get those letters. So
that's cool.
Bring it back.
I'm not sure if I ever did that in grade school.
Oh, really? Yeah, it used to be a thing. Like you'd write letters and you'd send them off, and then mysteriously they'd maybe respond or not. I don't know. It was cool.
Yeah,
It was magical to get a letter, open it up in the mailbox, see the postman delivering it. It's like Christmas. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't feel that old, but I guess maybe I'm getting old.
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
Yeah, it's surprising. Like I just had my first kid. You know, she just turned 9 months.
Congratulations!
Wow. Like for the first time, I feel like an old man. It's like, what is going on right now?
Wait till your grandkids can roll their eyes. Then let me know.
I don't want to even.
That's when you know you've made it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you become lame to your grandchildren, you've pretty much accomplished their life.
Right. Well, guys, you know, I start with everyone's background, and I'll tell you why I do that. It's because I have a varied audience, right? I have a group of my audience that could be trying to get into IT or security, maybe straight out of college, or they're trying to do a career change. You know, they may not know that it's possible for them, right? And I've found after doing, you know, over 150 episodes now that I haven't heard the same background twice. You know, and so I feel like, you know, I remember when I was trying to get into security and IT, right? Hearing other people talk about how they got into it made it feel like, okay, this is obtainable for me.
It's absolutely obtainable. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So Duane, you know, why don't we start with you? Like how did you get into IT? How did you get into security? Maybe what sparked that interest in you that, you know, brought you into this field?
Oh my gosh. Well, this will date me, but for me, it happened in high school. So in high school, I got my amateur radio license. And that hobby is all about tinkering with radio waves and electronics and figuring out how it all works. And, you know, like doing the mathematics of building your own antenna, right? And then how you can transmit on that antenna and bounce it off the ionosphere and then talk to somebody 7,000 miles away. And you get into that world of really tinkering and figuring things out. And at the time the Apple IIe came out, and my parents spent a fortune on an Apple IIe. And my brother and I were enamored with it. And then later on, you know, started pulling apart our 386 computer, doing online BBSs, and bringing. So that world sort of grasped us. And part of it, honestly, was video games back then, because you couldn't just click a game and play it. Back then, it was like you had to install it and then move memory drivers around and then like decide whether you wanted the mouse. Because if you didn't want the mouse, you could save memory if you got rid of.
And then there was cheating,
right? Yeah. So there's all that tinkering involved with computers back in those days, and we started playing around with bulletin board systems. And for the listeners who might not know what a bulletin board system is, you'd have a modem and you would dial up another computer that was running a program that you could then log into in essence and play what they called door games. And then it was probing the systems there. Well, what else can I do? Like, can I get it to give me a command? Can I get it to do these types of things? And that's when I started early on in cybersecurity. There was an incident in high school. I did get suspended for computer acts that we won't talk about. Fast forward, got my computer science degree. Actually, oddly enough, I went to a Benedictine monk college because most of the engineering colleges turned me down at the time. They were like, listen, we don't want a student with your background, right? In computer nefariousness.
Now they'd be dying for him. They'd be lining up.
So I applied
that's
at...
the way to start a career.
Right? I applied at St. Anselm College. So it's a Benedictine monk. I mean, literally, like... the monks with the brown robes and the rope ties and that sort of stuff. And they're like, you know what? We think we can reform you. We think you can. So yeah, you can get your computer science degree here. So then when I graduated, I had my computer science degree, my Bachelor of Arts in computer science. And I started teaching for Microsoft. And I was doing Microsoft courses at that time and teaching TCP/IP and that sort of thing. And I went to take my next course, which was in Commerce Server, Patrick.
Merch, it was Commerce Server.
Commerce Server.
We had transitioned from merchant server.
So I was taking my next course so that I could deliver solutions to customers. And lo and behold, my instructor, this old crotchety West Point graduate, Patrick Hines, was like, "Hey, we should start working together." And this is in 2000. This is March of 2000. So
yeah,
long time ago. So that's how I got into it, and then hilarity ensued. So it's all downhill from there.
And Patrick, how did you get your start?
So I went to the military academy at West Point. I did not focus on computers, but I bought one. And I was into it, and I was playing Gunship and the games of the day, and so I became the infantryman who knew computers in my unit, and so I was repairing computers and doing things that people were afraid to do, and I just wasn't afraid to break it because I'd already broken mine so many times. And then when I got out of the service after the Gulf War, I went in the reserves, but I wanted to go into the civilian sector. I started programming, and I got into security right away because I always thought about the military side of things and the adversarial thinking. I guess that's the way I would describe it. When I was, after going to West Point, when people look at like nice pictures of meadows and tree lines and things like that, they think about picnics and butterflies. And I think where I'm going to put the machine guns. And so I think about systems as far as what could go wrong. And that put me in the right mindset. And so once I started working with Duane, this is where we went. We started doing pen tests and vulnerability assessments and risk analysis almost 20 years ago, actually. Right after we started looking for this kind of work. And we did a lot of programming, a lot of system enterprise stuff. Between us, we've probably visited 80% of the Fortune 500 and the Global 1000 over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not always in the as a pen tester, but a lot of times as a security engineer. And so now that's all we do.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. It's it's when you bring up your mentality, right? That kind of, I guess, directed you towards security. I can really relate to that. And so my wife and I, we fairly recently we built our house. Right. Nice. And so when you build a house, you got to, there's a million decisions.
And my condolences. Congratulations on my condolences.
Right. I will never financially recover from this decision. But, you go through a million different choices, and like, in the front of the house, there's a big window. My wife loved it. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, that's a non-defensible structure. Like anyone can get through that thing, you know? And she's like, hey, can you take your security hat off for a minute?
Yeah. Nope.
Just think about aesthetics. I'm like, that's your job, though.
Nope.
Yeah, she's like, who hurt you as a child?
So do you have a big front yard? Do you have a big front yard?
It's a good amount, yeah.
So put some wood piles in and put like some PVC pipe in the wood piles, and you can use those as fighting positions.
There you go. See? Yeah. The thing that always struck me, the thing that made me start thinking about physical security is when I met Patrick, because I was always into the digital security, tearing computers apart and that sort of stuff. But we'd sit down in a conference room with a customer or something like that. Patrick very specifically would pick a chair. Like it would always be a chair facing the door. I'd be like, what are you doing? And he's like, I want to see him coming. I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, seriously. Yeah. Yep, that's always the mentality.
I've been tested. There's nothing wrong with me. But we don't have computer science. Duane has a computer science degree. He doesn't have a cybersecurity. I don't even have a computer science degree. I'm all self-taught. The bottom line is we've got veterans. We've got people who used to work as mechanics. We've got all sorts of people who work for us who are excellent cybersecurity engineers who never started in technology. It's a long road, but you can self-service your way to it.
One of our great pen testers, his job before this is he was a salesperson. I think he was a salesperson at Oracle. Yeah, and he used to sell a technical product, but he's fantastic at ripping apart websites. Like, just you name it, he can swizzle and tear apart a website like you wouldn't believe. And it really, hacking is a mentality. You want to know how it all works. You want to tear it apart and see the insides, and I don't know, sometimes put it back together, but mostly just break it. And that's find
somebody else's job, isn't it?
Yeah.
If we're doing it right, it's somebody else's job.
So we find that mentality is the most important part, not the technical background or the know-how or whatever. That can all be taught. It's really just the drive to understand how it all works.
Problem solving. So some people come at it differently. Some people are gamers. Gamers like to solve problems and they like the challenge. Some people, it's the aesthetic. They're more into Sudoku, and they like, there's no one personality type. But you can't be intellectually lazy. That's probably the biggest thing. You have to be curious. What I like to tell people who are trying to get into it, because I think that's where you're going with this, is you need to learn all the buzzwords, not because you're trying to fool anybody, but if you're hacking a system and you find a file that says something about Kubernetes, you need to know what that means so that you know where to go with it. If you find something that talks about indexes, you know what that means, or X500. Terminology is the first obstacle. It's kind of like anatomy for doctors. Doctors have to learn Gray's Anatomy, and it washes out a lot of people in medical school. The same thing's true here. We tell people when they start, they need to learn a little about a lot. So listen to the first 10 minutes of 110-hour courses, because you only need to know the buzzwords. What's this? Oh, that's what it's used for. Okay, great. Moving on. And then eventually you come back for the depth and you learn the hacking skills and things like that. But there's a lot of cybersecurity positions that aren't offensive, that aren't what we do. We're like red team hackers, and that's kind of the dramatized. There's one of us on the Mission Impossible team. There's one of us on every break-in crew, and it's like, wow, you want me to hack the NSA? This is going to be tough. I'm in. That doesn't actually work. But the advice would be, it is a lot easier to get into. It's a lot harder to stay in because you have to run the whole time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's why there's so much burnout in security. And people don't understand that from the outside. It's like, I constantly need to be on top of my stuff. If I miss one thing and my boss starts to be like, oh, he's not where I thought he was.
Yeah.
Like this field is 100% employed. It's not like, 50% of us are, unemployed at any one point in time. Like, my buddy, I was at a mortgage company when the interest rates started to turn.
Yeah.
And so immediately they laid off like 12,000 people. And my buddy on the security team was a part of those 12,000 people in the first round of layoffs. Right.
Yeah.
This was a Monday or a Tuesday. By Friday, he had an offer in hand.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
As a security specialist, you could forget how to speak English and they would make allowances.
Most of us don't know how to speak English.
Yeah, that's true.
It's all acronyms.
Python better than I speak in English.
Right. But you're exactly right. You get that, like, it's a treadmill. Like, constantly. My wife is like, listen, I love the fact that you love what you do. And I hate the fact that you love what you do, because it's like my phone's always blowing up and I'm like, oh, wait, hold on. There's this really cool Citrix hack that just came out. Let me read about it. Or there's this, there's a really new, I don't know if you've seen this logo fail, but there's a way to breach any computer right now by injecting a logo into the BIOS. Then it bypasses all security. And there's like, and I'm reading these things. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is a ROP chain or this is a whatever. And she's like, oh, it's great that you're excited, but honestly, put it away. And I'm like, every 5 seconds, something is happening. There's a breach in some major system, right? And it's constantly moving.
Well, have you ever heard our podcast? Every time something's horribly bad, Duane's loving it.
Oh, I do. When the internet's on fire is when I'm my happiest.
Yeah. I mean, my another one of my buddies at another company, he's been dealing with a hack for the past month. Mm-hmm. They just like keep on targeting him in different ways. I mean, he's on a team of like 5 people. I'm like, dude, you need to tell your CISO to like hire me
Yeah.
and beef up the team.
Yes.
It's
There's also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's also people I've encountered in our space that are burning out because the clients just don't listen.
Mm.
And it's like they feel like it feels like they're I don't want to use a bad term, but they're moving against the tide. How about that?
Yeah.
And they're just sick of the fact that they know what the people need to do. They've told them what they need to do and they won't do it. Like patching. Like,
oh my God.
just, don't be stupid about it. Just patch, or change the password policy and don't let the executives get away with cheating, because it's not like other things like where you park, where, it's rank, have its privileges. If you get hacked, everybody gets hacked with you.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually just encountered this yesterday of, you're presenting these vulnerabilities, right? Of like, hey, this has been here since September. Like this was patched by Microsoft's Patch Tuesday in September.
Yeah.
And you still have this throughout the entire environment. What are we talking about right now? Like, what are you guys paying for? Please tell me what you're paying for, because now I feel guilty because I'm doing my job, but I feel like I'm not enabling you,
Right.
Duane had an excellent analogy of you go to your doctor and they say you need to eat some fruits and vegetables and and you're like, no, ain't going to happen.
No.
And that's how it feels.
No.
But I still don't, I understand the, I don't want to eat fruits and vegetables thing, but I don't understand that I don't want a patch when a patch is available thing. Doesn't make sense.
No, it's amazing.
My mentality with the fruits and vegetables, I actually just got told, I need to eat more fruits and vegetables. And I'm like, so I can't just work out harder? Can I just bypass that whole thing and just work out harder?
Patrick always says when we go out to dinner or whatever, they'll bring like a hamburger and Patrick will be like, hey, and they'll be like, do you want tomato? Do you want lettuce? And he'll be like, no, keep all that stuff. That's what food eats. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
You don't need
but
to
it's
waste
tough.
it on me.
Yeah, but it's tough. You gotta. I feel for the doctors now, where they're like, "Hey, you should work out more. You should eat better. You should, drink more water." And all of us are like, "Yeah, but is there like a pill or something you can give me, like something?" And then you see it in the you see it in the cybersecurity space where you're like, "You should patch. You should have better password policies. You should have, some sort of global aggregated log that you can look through." And they're like, yeah, but is there just like some simple product I can buy that'll make me 100% secure? You're like, no, there isn't. Like, you have to do these things.
Even if there was a product that you could deploy and you'll be 100% secure, you still have to do the work and deploy it and configure it. And you need to maintain it. And you need to, guess what? You need to keep it updated. So if you're not updating your Windows, you're probably not going to update this thing, right? Like there's still work involved.
Yep. Here's what you do. You go into the customer, you go like, absolutely, I can do this. I can make you 100% secure. And you power the computer off and you walk off and you're like, you're good. You're good. Just leave that off. Don't turn that back on. You're good. Nobody can hack you.
Well, we've also seen a lot of complaints by big companies that they'll hire a company to do a pen test or an audit or something, and they'll get something that's completely inactionable and useless because there's a shortage of people in our field. Yeah. There's also a lot of people who are willing to deliver subpar products and they don't get called for it. A lot of our customers have said, we're only going to deal with you once because we've had such bad results in your industry. We're going to play the field. And some of those customers are working with us for 3-4 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of it is like, listen, there is a shortage in this field. The three of us probably know better than most. We don't have a sales staff. We don't need one. It's just people who need cybersecurity hear from other people who have had services with you. It's just such a crazy market right now. But the problem is you run into those providers who are like, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this automated scanner. I'm going to run it against you. I'm going to call it a pen test. I'm going to throw you a report that's 900 lines long. That really doesn't mean anything. And then I'm going to move on to the next customer. And yeah, it's unfortunate that happens because it really doesn't help anybody at that point.
Nope.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's interesting because several years ago, I started my LLC to start, kind of like consulting and whatever else, right? Because I always have the habit of doing a whole just shit ton of side work,
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, like I need to do this a little bit more smart. Let's get an LLC going and figure that whole thing out. And, I don't know what got into me. I put like security consultant in my title on LinkedIn. Right. And when I was forming the LLC, I'm like, well, I'm not going to get any customers. I'm one man show.
Sure.
I don't know anything, I engineer this product really well, but that's really it. No one's going to hire me. And I mean, I did that on Monday, and by Friday I had 3 customers.
Yeah.
I'm like,
crazy.
What? Like I had to figure out how to write a contract and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
I mean, we're talking like last minute. It's like, guys, like, I don't know what the hell. I don't know if I know what I'm doing. Like.
Well, your first mistake was listing cyber on your resume. No, I'm just kidding. But there's such a short. The last numbers I saw was 500,000 open positions in the United States and 3 million worldwide. And basically it's and that's for people who can actually help you get secure, not just people who are fixing after you get ransomware.
Like forensics and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's actually a lot easier to stand out in the field than I think people realize. And the reason why I say that is, so my first like big boy cert, right, was the CCSP.
Mm-hmm.
It was extremely difficult for me to get it. It was a huge leap forward. And I figured I'm one of a million. Like it's not going to make me stand out. It's just going to help me start a conversation again into cloud security. Right. That's how I viewed it. And, fairly recently, I got that several years ago. Fairly recently, I looked up the numbers of how many actually have the certification. It's like 5,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
It was either worldwide or in North America, but either way, that number is insane.
Way small.
Because you have this high level cert in cloud security. Cloud security is a field of security that's blowing up. Right, that's where everything is going. And there's 5,500 people that have this cert.
Yeah.
I mean, you put in the time, you put in the work, you get the cert, and now you're standing apart. From the other 10 million of us that are in security.
Right.
So I used to be a big certification guy back in the old days when you two were probably both in high school or junior high school.
Wow.
So So at one point I had 55 Microsoft technical certifications, MCSE, MCSD, MCP, everything.
Oh yeah.
MCT. And I went from 50 to 55 and no one cared. At that point, I could have stopped at 10 and nobody. Yeah. So what happens is it's become so rarefied. I'm not saying you shouldn't get certification. I really like certifications, but like CISSP, specific cloud stuff, AI that is going to be coming out soon, OSCP, OSWE, the OffSec stuff, the right SANS certifications. Those are all excellent advertisements. But as long as you can do the work and not just it be a book certification, but that's what the interview is all about.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I would recommend if people can get a certification like that, it is a great way to be in. Once you can get one of those certifications, you're in the industry.
Yeah. And I'm on that. I'm on the side of like, if there's a new certification in cloud security or like I have, my OSCP, my Pen 300, I have my GX Pen, like, so I'm always looking for what classes and training can I get that's going to teach me new tactics and techniques I might not otherwise run into. And I want to go and get the certification to prove, I do know these things. And I agree, what happens in the beginning of a field, and cybersecurity really is kind of just blowing up. What happens in the beginning of the field is, how do you tell? You're right, absolutely, Joe. From the other 10 million people who say they're cybersecurity experts, because they know cybersecurity is a big field, and yesterday they were a network administrator, and now they changed their title to cybersecurity administrator. How do you know that person knows what they're doing, right? And certifications set us apart. Maybe 10, 15 years from now, everybody has those certs, right? Because, it's kind of commonplace for them to take them. We saw that with the MCSE back in the late 90s, early 2000 range, right? If you were an MCSE in, 96, 97, 98, like you were countably few. And then when you got into like 2005, 2006, you get a busload of MCSEs for $100, right? And I'm hoping cybersecurity goes there, but honestly, I just don't think anybody, there's such a treadmill to stay in cybersecurity. I think people won't want to keep doing it. So we'll see what happens. But
I don't know. I think they'll get paper. I think we're already seeing some of that where paper security engineers who are willing to give you a rote answer and collect the fee. And I think there's some of that there now. But yeah, in order to actually hold your own, you need to stay on the treadmill because it's changed so much.
Yeah, I think, what I always recommend, right? Let's assume someone's trying to get into cloud security. What I recommend typically is, let's start with a broad cert, right? And then choose a cloud. And you may not have to necessarily go like deep in terms of get all 25 of the AWS certs, right? Or however many they have.
23, 24, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Just kidding.
I've only had 2 AWS certs, but I had their foundations level cert, and then I had their like hardest security cert, right? And that was a terrible mistake that I made because like literally the week of taking my exam, I learned, I should have taken like this other cert before taking it. Like this is meant to build onto that.
Yeah, baby steps, Joe. Baby steps.
But like the reason I give, is one, you have to know the language, like what you guys were talking about. You have to know all the buzzwords. You have to actually have a good understanding, so that overarching non-technical cert will get you there. And then you have that deep dive technical cert, like the AWS security specialist certification, which is actually very surprisingly technical. It's a multiple choice, nothing but words exam, but you need to know the words. Ins and out. You don't need to just like know the terms. You're thinking about IAM roles and rules and how you would deploy it, and then you have to troubleshoot it and talking about services talking to each other. I mean, that is technical. And that was actually proven, in my current role, my current day job, where, I was on this call. It was like week 1 of starting, and they were like, "Oh, we can't do it. We have to open up this thing." It's very like obscure. It was going to put the organization at risk. I was like, guys, like AWS, has this thing. It's called a VPC endpoint. Like, can't we just deploy that, or a Bastion host? Like, they're the same thing, different words.
Huzzah!
And he goes, "Oh no, that doesn't exist." I'm like, I'm pretty sure it exists because they just beat it into me for this exam, but maybe I'm wrong.
Exactly. Yeah.
And within 30 minutes, he was like, "Oh, he's right. We'll do that."
Yeah, and that's a majority. Like cloud right now there's so many moving parts in cloud, and there's so many new and upcoming services. And should we put an ELB on that? And let's use an elk stack, and let's use and a lot of people. And they're not only just the terminology, but then the hey, we got this new microservice that we're offering over here, and it's like, okay, well, how do I secure it? And what so it's real easy for customers to architect themselves. I say architect with air quotes into a very bad place. Like, let me just click the start button on all these services and we're good. And you're like, no, you really need an expert who knows how to actually control the data flow to know what.
And there's a lot of things that they don't, that aren't the default as far as backups and recovery and logs. I mean, all the logs that you might need for a breach. How many times have we gone in with somebody's had a business
email compromise or something
exactly
along those lines.
And we have to go in and it's like none of the logs are turned on, so next time we'll get them. Not this time.
Right. Ooh.
So close.
It's and all of the clouds are like speaking different languages. You have to, it's not just like even buzz terms too, because they operate differently. And it's like for the tech industry, just overall, like cloud security is going to turn into a place where it's like, okay, we have a cloud security AWS team, and then we have a cloud security Azure team.
100%.
I was recently talking to someone that is, entirely into Azure, and I'm, well certified in AWS, and I understand, Azure overall, right? But I couldn't tell you any of the terms. I'm over here with a cheat sheet, looking it up,
like you're talking a foreign language.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's like, they use this word. All right.
Right. Well, it's tough too, because each of those clouds was designed with a different customer in mind, right? AWS's cloud initially was designed with developers in mind. And then when they started getting into the enterprise, they were like, oh, crap, we got to change how we architect things. The Microsoft was designed with enterprise in mind. But then when you're an individual trying to use it as a developer and that sort of stuff, you're like, well, there's a lot of weird kind of oddities here. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, right now, I agree with you, Joe. Eventually, it's going to be, are you an Azure cloud security guy? Right now, they're like, okay, can you spell security and cloud? Because we're going to put you in any cloud we can because there's just not enough people to specialize.
You missed 2 vowels. Okay, we're going to accept that.
It's fine. It's fine. You only needed a 70. Yeah.
It's like, I miss those words too. No big deal.
Exactly. It's fine. It's fine.
So how do you guys maintain your mental health while, being in this field?
Bold
right?
assumption there.
How do you
bold assumption that we have mental health? I mean,
alcohol. No.
I mean, I've had people on that just like admitted to like pretty destructive behaviors. So as long as you're not an alcoholic, I think you'll be okay.
No, so honestly, for me, I'm a martial arts instructor. So 3 days a week, I get out of the house and I go and either just do martial arts or teach martial arts. And then I'm also a robotics mentor. So I work with the local high school and I mentor robotics. So that's also 3 days a week. So in the evenings, I'm forced to step away and just go do something else. And it's still either in the tech field or with martial arts. There's actually an odd sort of symbiosis between hacking and martial arts. Like hackers manipulate computers to do things that they weren't designed to do, and martial artists manipulate the human body to do things generally they weren't designed to do. But yeah, that's for me. That's it. Is just really getting out, either doing martial arts, doing robotics, and then coming fresh to do it.
Yeah, and I like to cleanse my palate with something a lot less technical, and that's why I have a quantum computing podcast.
Oh, okay.
Something light and easy.
Let's spice that up, right?
Well, Duane stole my answer. I've been doing martial arts for 50 years, and he stole my answer.
But it's pretty common, honestly, in this field. There are a lot of martial artists, and I think that's one of the things. Is like it's martial artists.
I think it's the seeking of control. Is what we have.
Well, it could be, but I think it's a heady enough sport where there's a lot of thinking and puzzle solving in it.
That's true.
But it's also still a sport. It still gets you out onto the field and doing things. And it's the sort of the natural progression of someone who really likes to break things apart and solve problems and twist
like
the Rubik's Cube. And then go break elbows and twist people. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually going to start getting back into jiu-jitsu here.
Nice.
Soon.
Nice.
Good. Pretty excited.
Japanese or Brazilian?
Brazilian.
It's pretty common. I hold rank in Nihon Jiu-Jitsu, which is the Japanese, started by Master Sato, who I met several times. My son-in-law is big in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and so we kind of have our lanes. He does Brazilian, and I stay over here in Japanese.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap, though.
Yeah, it's you bring up the control aspect of it, and that's it's really interesting. When I was in high school, right, I was a wrestler in high school, and I mean, week 1 you learn control the head, and you'll control where they go, control their hips, and you're gonna win. They'll do whatever you want them to do. And you don't really understand it, and you're going through these moves, but like thinking back and then being in like real confrontations, it's like like those basics, like there's literally
they're defining principles.
There's no chance that anyone defends that if they don't understand when you're controlling their hips,
right, and
why you're doing it and how you're doing it, where you're applying pressure. It's like, you're just going to feed into it, at that point.
And it's funny you say that, because then translate that over to what we do in offensive cybersecurity. We do the same thing. We apply the pressure because we know they're not going to be able to defend against it. So sometimes we'll be really loud on one part of the network so that we can exfiltrate data from another side of the network. And we know how they're going to react. And we know if we, cause enough noise, the SOC is going to go nuts over the SQL server over here and not pay attention to this file server that we're completely, pulling data off of. So there's all sorts of those same sort of tactics from a logical standpoint in what we do as well. So you also do a lot of things to see if you get a reaction. Yeah. And so if you're in a competition, we'll call it, or a fight, and you're well overmatched, that's when you might experiment a little bit. So to see if the
the CERT team or the SOC that they're using will see, why aren't they seeing this? We're setting up red flares. How come they're not? We shut down, we uninstalled their agent. Why are they not seeing this?
Oh my God. Most recent pen test we had, we all know about Netcat, right? Pretty common ability to get a reverse shell on a server. We never use it because it's detected by every AV on the planet for the last decade. And we had super fancy reverse shells we were using, and all of them were getting caught. And we're like, you know what? Let's just throw this oldie on there. And we threw like straight up Netcat, and it's fine. Like Defender didn't care. Like nothing cared. It was like, oh yeah, this is a tool from, the 90s. And you're like, this is nuts. Yeah. So definitely probing the defenses is something that ties to both martial arts and hacking as well.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I've seen that too, and like I've encountered situations where, teams or pretty large teams of people will say, oh yeah, I know what to do if we're getting DDoSed, or I know what to do if, there's data being exfiltrated or whatnot. And then you get to the tabletop exercise and like the developing team or the developer team didn't even tell security that this was going on. Mm. And then, the question is asked, well, what's alerting on it? Well, nothing's alerting on it. Like there's no logs for this,
Right.
You're like, just going through, like you're just like begrudgingly going through, this next hour or 2 hours of a tabletop exercise. Is like, well, yeah, we failed. I mean, there's always a couple people that are confident, like, yeah, we did good. It's like, guys, we got breached.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but we did it with style.
But it could have been worse.
Yeah, I love that rationale. Yeah. Oh, but we only got breached, 2% of our data. It's like, guys.
Yeah. That's all we had available for the
exercise. A look at 23andMe or whatever. They got breached and they said, oh, it was only 14,000 accounts. That's it. You guys are good. You're good. And then 2 days ago, they came back and they're like, our bad. It was actually 6.9 million, and it was half of our database.
But only half.
It was an entire, but only you went
half.
from 0.01% of your database to half of it. They're like, but the other half's secure. You're like, yeah, okay.
Or Okta or LastPass.
Exactly. Yes. The story.
I mean, thankfully, Okta isn't a sponsor of the podcast, but like,
if they were, they wouldn't be soon.
Yeah. I cannot believe that. Like, before they were like, oh, yeah, it was only targeted on the government clients.
Like,
that's what they said. And then they're like, oh, there's a couple stragglers too,
One or two.
Like, guys, I'm in security. Okay. Like, you can find this out before you make your first post.
Yep.
Like, you knew this. You 100% knew this. Someone at your company knew.
Yep.
Like, you can't tell me you didn't know.
Somebody knew, but always I'm very charitable in that I subscribe to the thing is never ascribe to malice what can be explained by incompetence. And so it's very possible that the person giving the statement believed what they said at the time that they said it, and they're not communicating. It doesn't make them look any better, but at least they're not evil.
No.
I guess that's possible. They didn't trust the hopefully highly paid engineer and architect that told them, hey, this was 100%. They were like, no, it can't be 100%. It's only 1%.
Right. That highly paid, overworked, probably not as highly paid as he or she should be engineer who right now is like, oh my God.
Probably recently fired.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
But, you guys also have a podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you stay motivated with staying up on top of the podcast? Because I feel like, doing it myself, doing a day job, doing some consulting, doing a podcast, at least the first two are kind of related. The first two, you get away with doing one and you know how to do the other. But doing a podcast and marketing it and getting on guests and all that sort of stuff, right? I mean, like I just told you, right? Like, we started the conversation off with, like, it's literally been a year since we started talking about this.
Yeah.
Like, how do you manage it? Because I'm having a terrible time doing it.
You're not going to like the answer. You're not going to like the answer at all. So for Security This Week, so our podcast that we do weekly is securitythisweek.com. We have a partner in that, Carl Franklin, who is a gifted programmer, someone who I've known for many years, even as long as I've known Duane, almost. And he and I got together many years ago, and he had a podcast that he still has called .NET Rocks. And I was the first guest on his podcast. I didn't know what a podcast was until he explained it to me.
I don't know, 2000, what,
One.
5, 2001? 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought him
So he's
and his
been
grandmother
podcasting
would
for
be the only ones
22
that
years.
ever heard of this.
Yeah.
So he does the technology, he does the recording, and we all promote it through. So we it's a 3-man team. It's a lot. Have more hands make light work. For my podcast, my partner in the Quantum podcast, entangledthings.com, is a PhD in AI out of Romania, who is more busy than me, and I'm pretty busy. So we have our CIO is an audio engineer. He does the recordings and the editing. Our head of marketing gets the guests on and does the promotions. And so we cheat fair and square. If I was doing this alone, it's a lot of work. We know it.
Yeah. And I'd say for security this week, for content, so the goal of security this week is for the last 7 days, what were the biggest stories in cybersecurity and which of them were just type and you shouldn't worry about, and which of them aren't getting enough play and you really should take a peek at. And for me, those stories are the stories I'm already reading. I'm already constantly have these. Now all I have to do is bookmark them and say, hey, we want to talk about this on the pod this week. That's it. So from a content standpoint there, I think we've only had one guest in 2 years, 2.5 years, whatever.
Yeah, we had one special episode. We might do another. It's not a guest base. We're each other's guests. There's 3 of us.
I know, right?
Just like now.
So from that standpoint, the content's easy because my day job is keeping up on all of the scary things that are happening. And I just mark the ones that I think are interesting that I think the public should know about. And then we go and talk about them. So.
Yeah, it's very different when when you're doing it with other people.
Yes.
I actually started out having a co-host, and it was totally different. It was so much more, significantly easier.
Yes.
Because you could rely on another person.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, this guest, canceled on me, not a big deal.
Right.
I have someone that I can fill the space with, right?
Yep.
Well, now if there's no guest, it's just me talking. And I mean, no one really wants to hear that, so like it's just it's a different ball game, adding on these layers of difficulty. But I also think it's kind of that mentality of security that we talked about in the beginning of like, okay, I need to be learning, I need to be doing something new.
Yeah.
What's a good way to maybe voice your opinion on something or get your feedback out there, right? That gains more traction. Podcast is a great way of doing that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. With us, with 3 hosts, like if there's a week I'm in some skiff, hacking into a train, then the other 2
True
of
story.
them can, true story. And the other 2 of them can just talk, right? And they can go through stories and security and whatever, right? So there's always at least 2 of us, who can then sit down and do the podcast and it doesn't become a monologue. But yeah, it's I'd say it's tough being on your own.
So, Duane, I saw you are potentially good with cryptography. How in the world do you get good with cryptography?
Oh, that's so that story actually brings me to getting on a no-fly list.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, a watch list.
It's a rite of passage in
watch
security.
List. Yeah, exactly. Apparently, I pissed off Malaysia. And back up that story. Microsoft came to us and said, hey, listen, I'd like you to do a lecture. And I said, well, cryptography is something I've always loved the math. I always do like the mathematics of SSL and that sort of stuff when I'm giving lectures to developers and that sort of stuff so they understand how it all works. And this is back early days. I've been doing like mathematics and cryptography and that sort of stuff. I mean, heck, even I have 3 kids. As they were growing up, I would actually give them crypto quips a day. And be like, okay, solve these. And even to the point where my daughter's like, oh my gosh, she's looking at colleges now. And she's like, I want to go work for the NSA. I think because I was doing these crypto puzzles like all the time. But so, fast forward, I'm doing this lecture for Microsoft and they're like, well, we want it on distributed computing. I was like, okay, cool. So I created a distributed computing app for for scalping tickets at concert events.
And mobile.
of
It was a
course,
mobility
app,
day.
yeah. And we, of course, didn't want the authorities to be able to know what we were doing. So I entered in like frequency hopping and different layers of encryption and all sorts of stuff. And it was more to show how you would do encryption inside of a database at row level, and how you do encryption at the disk level, and how you do encryption at the protocol level, and that sort of stuff. Well, I had a buddy who worked for the VA who was going for higher and higher levels clearances, and he got flagged. And he was like, they were like, you know this guy? And they were like, oh my God. So they started to research me. But for the course of a year, I was the guy who always got pulled out at the airport to get searched. And I was like, dude, this is crazy. And then even on connecting flights, I go from like Boston to Baltimore to, Seattle. And in Baltimore, they'd pull me out. And I was like, Boston just checked me. Like, seriously, what's going on? Come to find out, my lecture that I had posted got picked up by the government of Malaysia. And they put it on their website. And they were like, look how horrible Americans are, and blah, blah, blah. And, Microsoft is supporting them, stealing things, that sort of stuff. And if you're a U.S. citizen and your name shows up on a foreign website, you instantly get on this watch list where you get pulled out. Yeah, So that's how my love of security made it hard to travel, or cryptography made it hard to travel. But more, it was just the love of the mathematics and the puzzles. Like, that's why I love offensive security. It's the puzzle.
He's off the list now, but he's still not going to Malaysia.
still never
I wouldn't
going to
either. How do you get started, going down that path, right? Because that's an area that's always interested me. And I know it's interested other people. Yeah, but
the good news is it's all starting over. That's good.
It is.
That's the good news.
Yeah, it's all changing.
So let me jump in here. So math is a part of your future if you want to be in cryptography. A little bit of math, a little bit at least. There's some really good YouTube videos that explain step by step using really small numbers how to do RSA and how it works for asymmetric encryption. So the first thing you need to understand is there's two different types of encryption. There's the one where we share a key. I hope you don't mind me going through this here.
No, it's great.
Okay. There's one where we share a key and we have to be in the same place or in a secret compartment or the cone of silence, if you remember Get Smart or whatever. And we have to share that secret, which is not always possible. When I go to a vendor that I've never visited before, I have to share a key in public, right? That's where public-private key encryption, RSA, elliptical curve, Diffie-Hellman come in. Okay. So this is current day encryption. So with symmetric encryption, it's fast and it handles very large things. If you encrypt a file or a hard drive, it's symmetric encryption. And you may be like, okay, well, what about a transaction on the internet? Yeah, every time you order something on the internet, it's using symmetric encryption for all your communications. But how did I get
that key?
Yeah, how did 1-800-Flowers, free plug, get that key so that I could have a secure transmission? Well, they exchanged the key as part of asymmetric encryption with RSA because it is not suitable. It's not fast, and it also doesn't accommodate large pieces of information, but it's enough for us to share a secret key. So RSA is really the big standard, but you can also use elliptical curve, and they're all using the discrete log problem of it's really hard to take really large primes, multiply them together, and then factor those primes because that's how you break it if you're not one of the parties to the encryption. So fast forward to quantum computers. And quantum computers, through Peter Shor's algorithm, mathematician, professor at MIT, will break RSA not in 1 billion years or 1 trillion years, which is what it would currently take, but in minutes or hours. And so when quantum becomes ubiquitous, which is probably not more than a decade or certainly not more than 2 decades away, then we need a new encryption standard that we're already been using. And so NIST has come out with new encryption standards based on mostly crystal technology, and which is more geometric. And so the good news is if you want to get an encryption now, you probably have to learn what's going on now, but you have to really focus on what's coming. And so I would encourage organizations to start getting ahead on this, because if you thought the old stuff was hard, the new stuff's going to be harder.
Yeah, when you start talking about crystals dilithium and crystals kyber. And
I love those names.
I know, right?
So crystals kyber is the key encapsulation mechanism. It's the RSA encryption mechanism replacement. And dilithium is the signature technology using crystals. And we could do a whole show on that.
Right.
But and maybe we should,
Huh.
but it's a good time to get into it because you can start learning about this new technology and learn a little bit about that, and you'll be in demand because the government has mandated that organizations start using, if you want to work with the government, you're going to have to start using the new encryption because there's fear that certain nations that I probably won't travel to anytime soon, like Russia and China, are collecting this information so that they can crack it later.
Right.
Using the old
imagine
encryptions.
Imagine if you could collect all of the encrypted data today and knowing in about 10, 15 years, you'll be able to open it all up. Won't be declassified at that point, but yeah.
It will be to you. So did that answer your question or did I go way off on a tangent?
No, I think that makes sense. And I think that they both build on each other.
Mhm.
You know, like that was actually going to be my follow-up question, you know, because I find it interesting, and me as someone that is paranoid, I guess, from the job market, right? I always want to be ahead of the curve, right?
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, I identified cloud security as something I wanted to get into, did the work, got into cloud security. Now it's like, okay, I have that expertise. Where am I going next? Well, quantum is where everything's going
Come
next.
on to
But how in
quantum.
the hell do I get into quantum, you know?
There's going to be, if you think it's hard to find engineers for cyber, wait 20 years and watch quantum because
Oh my gosh.
it's not that hard if you're willing to have an open mind, but there's some basics you got to really accept. And the hardest part about the quantum stuff is once you start getting into it is you want to understand why. That's a dangerous question because honestly, we don't know why. And so you're going to be disappointed until you just like suspend belief and act like it's a Superman movie. Oh yeah, he can fly. Just move on.
Now what can we do? Yeah.
He can fly.
Assuming he flies, now what do we do? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
So is that so the two solutions that you talked about, are those what's considered like, was it? It's like quantum resistant
Yes.
technology?
Yes. Yeah. They're quantum resistant algorithms, and they're trying. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, came out with their recommendations. They started with 57 different mechanisms, and they had all sorts of cool names, and some of them are still going to be in use. But the winners seem to be the crystals.org. There's a company called Crystals.org. They don't sell Aura charts or anything like that. And they've come up with these algorithms. There's a company called PQ Shield that's very heavily involved. And if you're interested in this, you might want to get on their mailing list. They send out a lot of interesting articles. They did an article where they talked about what it would take to take the Signal app, the communications app, and change its algorithms to be quantum resistant and use the new algorithms. So there's a lot coming here. There's also a lot of promise that quantum itself will solve some of these problems with quantum key distribution, the ability to generate unbreakable keys using quantum technology. But that's kind of a chicken and egg thing. You can't wait for that because by the time that's ready for prime time, your data's already toast. So you need to get ahead with the NIST recommendations, the crystal stuff, and then get into it. I can explain the crystal stuff a little bit more, but
sure.
Okay. All right. Glutton for punishment. So imagine a matrix, a diagram, just a 2D XY axis. And so if I say the matrix is 1, 1, that means every whole number point on that whole grid is a potential point. Is a valid point in the matrix, in the lattice, we call it. Now, a two-dimensional array is pretty simple and you can imagine things with it. But if I say it's 2, 2, then that means 0, 0 would be a point, 2, 0 would be a point, 2, 2 would be a point, but 1, 1 would not be a point on that lattice. It's not a valid point. So I can basically come up with any number of lattices that I want, but they're always whole numbers. And it's an infinite space. Now
it's n-dimensional. Yeah.
But now multiply it by 1,000 dimensions or 100 dimensions. And if I look at the 2D space and I say, okay, I'm going to give you a number, I'm going to give you a point that's not on the lattice, and we're going to use the closest valid point on the lattice to that as the key. And you're going to be like, well, that's trivial. I give you a lattice of 2, 2, and I give you a point of 1.9, 1.9, right? Then the 2.2 point is the closest point. And that's easy to see. But what they do is they build in errors. Learning with errors is what they call it, which I still haven't got a good analogy for it. They build in some errors, and then they multiply it by 1,000-fold. And then it becomes really, really hard for a computer to figure out where the closest point is. And it becomes impossible for humans because we can't think in 1,000 dimensions. And so they're using a geometric relationships. And there's different ways of relationships that you can use. So that's what Crystals is doing. That's what lattice encryption is all about. I hope that was quick enough.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
I was going to say, it's enough to bake your noodle.
It's fun.
Yeah. Like I feel like I'm done for the day now. You know, like I'm just going to tell my boss, hey, like I went too deep on quantum.
I got to take it out.
I'll be back next week. I'll be back next week. That's all you need to know. Well, and again, if you nibble at it, you'll get there. It's just like cyber. None of us became cyber engineers overnight. It was a process. Quantum's the same way. AI is the same way. And I think those are the three key technologies that if you're good with one, you can do the others, because it takes you got to be curious for all of them. And I think, unfortunately, they're going to compete for each other, for people.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about going into an emerging field, right, like quantum, how do you become recognized as,
knowing
someone
anything?
that knows about it, right? How do you become recognized? Because there's no certs. There's extremely few jobs.
So
most companies aren't even thinking about quantum right now, nor do they want to.
So here's how quantum would work, in my opinion. And first thing is you got to know what you're talking about. So you got to go and consume and understand the basics. And you've got to look. You're gonna go to lectures. My first lecture on quantum computing was more than 10 years ago, before there was a quantum computer. And I was like fascinated by it. And then I seeked out people. I started reading books. I brushed up on my math, which it was pretty good anyways. And then a big turning point was I took the MIT courses on quantum. I actually went and, I had to pay something for it, but they were great. They filled in some blanks, and I found like-minded people. And I started doing presentations at code camps and other user groups on the topic to become, well, this is the guy. He's speaking about it, so he must. And I admitted early on, I'm an amateur. I'm just learning it. And then I managed to start a podcast 3 years ago with a guy who's, one of the brightest guys I've ever met, outside of present company, of course. And and I've been doing this podcast, so I've been talking to professors and CEOs. The government of Finland seeked us out to talk. So actually having a podcast, not a bad idea. And I would say that I'm pretty well known now in the small pond that is quantum, because I talk about it all the time and I'm reading about it all the time. And the guys send me articles all the time, and I'm constantly bringing it places like this where no one expects it. But honestly, just being able to have the conversation and applying for the job and knowing the terms, you're probably in. The secret handshake is, somebody tells an entanglement joke and you get it, or something like that, or somebody makes a reference. They might ask you some questions, but if you know your stuff, it's really not hard, because there's going to be so much demand. We're still very early days quantum if you're not doing the hardware stuff, but you can program right now. So I'm going to reveal something, and I know I'm doing too much talking. We were going to do a startup, Duane and I, with some other friends, where we were going to build a product to help develop new material science, new materials using quantum. Microsoft just released it, and so we killed our idea. But it's Microsoft. Microsoft has a Quantum Essentials. They basically will help you take development of new materials and accelerate it the way most people think it would take AI to do, but really you need AI plus quantum. Yep. And so there's tons of opportunities. There's going to be tons of startup. And in the next 5 years, we'll probably see tons of money going into startups, not for AI as much, but the money will switch over to quantum. So it's a good time to get ahead of that.
Yeah, I got a lot of work ahead of me then.
You're still
Sounds like.
sleeping, I bet. There's a lot of
Right?
time to be mined
Didn't
there.
he tell you he has a 9-month-old? He isn't sleeping.
Oh, he isn't sleeping. There you go.
Yeah, what are we talking about? Sleep?
Hey, what is this sleep thing you talk about?
Yeah, what?
I mean, it's self-serving, but podcasts go a long way. So
I love how Patrick opens up with, well, all you got to do is take the courses at MIT. And then,
I didn't
build on that as a foundation. You're like, oh,
I didn't have to
okay.
get accepted as an undergraduate. You just pay your.
Yeah, because that's anyone can just go to MIT. Apparently.
Well, honestly,
You know?
if you have $1,500, you can, but you have to also understand. So I'll be full disclosure. It was only 10 hours a week for 8 weeks, but I was spending another 20 hours a week on math.
Yeah.
On revisiting linear algebra, matrix math. I went back to Euclidean geometry just because I was trying to understand some of the things they were saying. And I got a lot out of it. I mean, I got every single little bit out of it. So your mileage may vary, but it was very helpful to me.
Huh. Well, in the next 5 years, I mean, this will be where we leave it. Of course, I don't mean to go over time. I know you guys are busy, but if you had to pick 3 fields for people to start getting into, right? Obviously, quantum is going to be one of them. What are other emerging fields that you think are going to be, blowing up, will be beneficial for someone to, get some sort of specialty in to kind of, secure that career?
So one that I would offer up, of course, cybersecurity, but cybersecurity is too general. I think what we're going to start seeing is cybersecurity around AI. And more specifically, you're going to start with things like cybersecurity around LLMs, and then move into more, securing the corpus of data that an AI may either have access to. So I think you're going to start to see more fields around really artificial intelligence, / machine
Blended.
learning, but yeah, and cybersecurity. I think that's going to be a hot field coming up very shortly. And then obviously quantum. Yeah, I think, quantum in general, but then quantum cybersecurity is a whole other mind-blowing thing around, understanding how lattices work and crystals and how to do entanglement of data. And, there's a lot going on there too.
If you want to be specific, I think the new quantum resistant encryption is a big space. As we were talking about, as Duane was talking about the AI, the security on AI. You got to understand AI and you got to understand security. That's an intersection. That's going to be big. But if I had to go big picture, it's going to still be quantum, AI, and cyber. Those are the 3 fields that are going to keep on. Those are the gifts that are going to keep on giving. And then it's the intersections. And maybe there's something new that's going to get invented we never heard of. But big data is still big. And, material science is going to be impacted by all of these.
Yeah, it sounds like we probably need to have another conversation. Maybe in a year we'll be able to get together again.
I think we can do it sooner,
Right?
Joe. Let's try to do it
Maybe
sooner.
we'll make it semi-annually.
Yeah, that'd be great. Awesome. Well, before I let you guys go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you, what your podcasts are and your website and all that good information so they could locate you and learn more about you if they want.
So we Pulsar Security is the company we work for that we founded. SecurityThisWeek.com is where we talk every week about cyber, and entangledthings.com is where I talk about quantum and Duane tries to avoid. And that's about it. We go to conferences, we speak at code camps and things like that. We're going to probably start a few up in New Hampshire. We're about an hour north of Boston, so that's where we are. If you're looking for me, I'm in the basement with my guns. So make sure I know you're coming.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you coming on. It was a fantastic conversation. We'll absolutely have to do it again, sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Joe.
Heck yeah.
Great talking.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. This was a lot of fun. Yeah. Anytime, Joe.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this episode.